Good morning and welcome to an audio edition of SimWorld today. It's February 20th. It is Marsh alone on the microphone for this one. I appreciate you tuning in all the same. We got plenty to get to. We got a little question mark of could the SWBA replicate the Four Nations tournament, some perception changes, but let's start with the fact that nobody is safe, particularly nobody in the top 5 and top 10, as last night Villanova and Princeton both go down in challenging defeats. Villanova at home 87-71 to Georgetown. Princeton on the road to SMU, formerly ranked SMU, likely to get back ranked SMU, 73-50. It's a continuation of what has been a chaotic run of top 25 teams. 6 of the top 10 teams have lost their last game. There is only 3 teams with winning streaks longer than 4 games. And the longest of them now is Virginia Tech alone at 15 straight. They're 16-2 overall. Behind them, it's Arkansas, who's won 6 in a row, UCLA, and then the only other team with a longer than 3-game winning streak is South Carolina, who actually returns to action in a SEC-heavy ESPN night on Thursday night in SimWorld U. That is where we sit, and this should come as no surprise that the top 25 teams, and particularly the top teams in the country, are going down for a couple reasons. One, did we really expect Duke, Texas, Villanova, Princeton, Georgia Tech, and Kentucky, the 6 teams that have lost their last, in the case of Georgia Tech and Kentucky, last 2 games, did we really expect them to not lose again? Of course not. Virginia Tech's going to go down here before too long. We can almost guarantee that. Teams just typically don't end the season with 1, 2, 3, or 4 losses. That means there's probably something going to come on the horizon. But the fact that they all came at the same time continues to underscore what I think most of us have had a pretty good idea about, and that is conference play. Conference play this season, I think, more than probably any other year in college basketball, at least recently, has seen so much turbulence in conference play. We've got a chaotic and exciting run in which only the top 2 teams are going to make the conference championship game, and you've got a lot of teams that are in the hunt for that spot. And you've got this very consistent level of competition that we didn't really know early on in the season. Who was it going to be? Was it going to be a lot of teams at the top? Was it going to be just a handful of teams at the top? Or was it going to be a big group of teams kind of intermingling? And there's certainly some elite teams, right? The top 5, the top 6, I think we could all say. And I think Georgia Tech and Kentucky, for many, are still within that list of teams that are very dangerous. But that line in the sand is getting kind of blurry right now, right? We've got a number of teams that are trying to pull away, but the fact is that as conference play has been introduced, we're seeing more good teams play each other. Case in point, the SEC. We're going to get Arkansas and we're going to get Kentucky. That's 2 top 10 teams going at it with massive implications tonight in the game of the week. Kentucky needing a win to stay in the race for the SEC championship game, and Arkansas getting a chance to really put the pedal to the metal for them to try to secure a spot. Plenty of time to go in the season here, about 11 games for most teams, 10 to 11, but the door's open. And conference play means that you stop playing the teams that aren't all that good. You stop playing the bottom feeders, or at least you stop consistently playing the bottom feeders. For example, the SEC, if you're Arkansas, you have to play South Carolina, that's number 20 in the country. Alabama, number 4. Florida, who's been ranked. Texas A&M, who has been ranked. Kentucky, who's number 9. Mississippi State, who's number 12. Right, just right there, you're looking at, 7, 8 opponents that are very dangerous, that are going to be tough to beat in the SEC. You didn't get that type of run. That's 7 of your 15 games, nearly half of your games, are going to be against teams that are either ranked or have been ranked. That doesn't happen in non-conference play in conferences like the SEC. In the Big East, where Villanova just took their first loss to Georgetown. Well, Georgetown's 14-7. They've been ranked. They worked number 25 the week before their disappointing loss to Marquette. In the Big East Conference, Butler, number 19. St. John's, number 13. Georgetown, who we talked about, was ranked at one point very much on the cusp. UConn, the two-time reigning national championship game appearance team, who's also been ranked. So you've got 4 of your 10 opponents, if you're Villanova, that have been ranked or are currently ranked in the top 25. You weren't getting that 4 of 10 matchups, 4 of your 10 games, or 4 of your 10 opponents are going to be ranked in your Big East games. It wasn't going to happen in non-conference play. The list goes on for pretty much every single conference, but that just continues to emphasize the point that conference play is dangerous, and we're starting to see that. Let's talk about the 2 teams that lost, though, Villanova and Princeton. Perception changes. Is there a perception change for either of them? Well, SMU, who was a formerly ranked team, dominated that second half after what was a pretty competitive first half, and really it was the defense that stepped in for the Mustangs in that one. Let's start there. There's no perception change for me on Princeton. Again, we were going to see losses. We were going to see Princeton wasn't running the table the rest of the way. I don't think this dramatically changes. I think they maybe fall 3 spots to number 10. Maybe they're 11. I think they're somewhere in that range. But I don't suddenly see this team any differently in the American Conference. They're still number 1. Now, their margin for error just got a heck of a lot smaller because SMU's won 3 in a row. They're 4-2 in conference play, and they're really half a game back of Princeton to getting into the championship game. Princeton's advantage. They beat Memphis, who's 3-1, so they have a little bit of some wiggle room right now to be able to potentially lose one more game. But this is what we should have expected. SMU was a really good basketball team, right? They started off a little slow, they got really hot, and then they've been pretty hot the rest of the way. There are 3 really great basketball teams in the American Conference, and there's a 4th pretty good one in Davidson. Princeton didn't move out of that list. Princeton didn't move off of number 1 just because they lost a single game, in my opinion. They stayed right where they were. This is a team that's very talented, but the question mark is going to always be for Princeton, if their defense isn't there, what does this team look like? And last night, in the second half, their defense wasn't there, and their offense disappeared. And that's why, as we talked about earlier this week on the show, there's a ceiling for Princeton. And I don't know that the ceiling, I think it was with Sniper J, I don't think the ceiling is a championship. Villanova, do we change our opinion or perception of Villanova? Not really. Why? Well, you lose by 16. That's not great, but this team was completely different than they were in the first half, in the second, scoring 50 points and making this thing look, fortunately, a heck of a lot closer than it really was. Why should our perception not change for Villanova? Well, because, 1, Georgetown's been a good basketball team. They've been inconsistent, but their peaks, as I mentioned yesterday, their peaks have been championship caliber peak. Their valleys have just been a little bit longer. Villanova hasn't had many valleys. This is probably the biggest valley that they've had to deal with in the entire season. I'm not going to change my opinion of a team because they get beat at home by a Georgetown squad that's actually really pretty good. Now, would we have liked it to not have been such an ugly loss? Ends up being 16. They trailed by more than that, obviously, earlier in the game. Yeah, you don't love to see these, but I'm not moving I'm not moving Villanova off of a potential championship track just because they lose this game. They were due for a loss. And it just happened to be an ugly one. And it also just happened to be on a night where Jay Laster goes nuts with 30 points in one of his best games in college hoops. It's just a loss. At the end of the day, that's what this racks up to, is the 4th loss of the season for Villanova. Time will tell if they change their tune or if that changes and any more follow suit. All right, let's get to tonight is the Four Nations final. That is going to be between USA and Canada, a pair of countries that have had deep sports-friendly rivalry that's certainly been influenced most recently, which we're not talking about necessarily, but the politics of our 2 nations. And they go to toe-to-toe in what has been one of the most exciting stretches in the professional hockey league season right now, really, because this is, essentially, they're pretty much their all-star break. And the question that plenty of people are saying and asking and wondering, and I'm not just saying that plenty of people to make it seem like there's a lot, but could the SWBA replicate this? And I would ask you how. Because while the SWBA has seen its fair share of very, very high elite talent entering the league in recent seasons, you've got 6 straight MVPs are from not America. And now I think some of that being from Serbia and Jokic winning, 3 of them, kind of muddies that conversation. But the fact that you've got, Joel Embiid and Luka Doncic and Nikola Jokic and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander as either the most recent winners or contenders for the MVP and considered the best players in the league gives the league this perception of internationality. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but if you look across the league, the vast majority of players are still coming from America. And the vast majority of All-Stars are still coming from America. I think there were 7 international players last season from the international scene, or from the world in this year's All-Star game. There's not a national versus national, because what you're going to have to do is your team France is going to have Rudy Gobert, right, next to Victor Wembanyama. It's going to have Gershon Yabba. It's going to be the Olympics, right? And if you've been watching the Court of Gold documentary on Netflix, which is great, you're going to see a lot of names that aren't all-stars, right? Evan Fournier, getting big minutes, getting a lot of screen time early on in the show. Not an all-star. So there's not a great way to do that, because hockey does have that, right? The league is littered with guys from multiple countries. It's also not being pegged as an all-star game, right? It's being pegged as Four Nations. It completely different also, by the way. And Four Nations also does not come a season after the Olympics, which is where I think if you did this right now for the SWBA, people would be like, well, this is just the Olympics. You're also trying to pull people from EuroLeague, from other international competitions to come over to America to play in a tournament. It's not going to happen. So what can you do? Well, you also can't really do, and in my opinion, USA versus the world. Why? Because if you read on The Athletic, they did a player survey. I think it was 2 of the guys said that players polled that participated in the tournament and in an all-star festivities. 2 of them said that they would like to see a USA versus the world. That's not a great subset. And if you want the product to be good on the floor, you need the players to buy into it. And so there's plenty of things. I don't know what the fix is for All-Star Weekend. The players will tell you East versus West. At the end of the day, what I think it mostly is don't cover it up with ad breaks. I think I saw a number 2.5 hours worth of ad breaks. Commercial breaks are just breaks in action, and 45 minutes of basketball. That right there is an unacceptable split. At the end of the day, that's probably the way you got to fix it, is make the product, not a celebration of TNT, not a celebration of a comedian, but make it a celebration of the players. And maybe competitive basketball in the All-Star game is just not part of this next generation. But it's also not going to be a Four Nations Cup that we see teams from pick your country here that show up and play in a tournament in the middle of the SWBA season. All right, that's our show. Reminder, game of the week coming up tonight. That is Kentucky and Arkansas. I had said that it was last night because I can't figure out days. But Kentucky and Arkansas at 8 p.m. That comes after South Carolina, Texas. This is a huge night in the SEC. A huge night in the SEC. If South Carolina can get that win, they'll move to 5-0, hand Texas A&M a third loss, potentially put Texas A&M out of the running. And if that's coupled with later in the night an Arkansas win, that almost certainly spells the end of Kentucky's run for an appearance in the conference championship game. And we start looking at a almost 4-team race if you want to throw in Florida, Auburn, or Ole Miss. But tonight has huge implications. This is a sliding door moment in this season's SEC race. It starts at 6:30 with South Carolina, Texas A&M. It continues at 8 p.m. with Kentucky and Arkansas. All of that over on ESPN. All right, appreciate you tuning in for this audio version. We're coming back tomorrow, hopefully as normal here on SimWorld TV. The only place you can see the game, be the game.